So may I now speak in the name of the living God, our Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer. Amen. Please do be seated. I'd like us to cast our minds back to 1999. And I appreciate that for some of us gathered here this morning, that may be somewhat of a challenge. But if you remember, I think in those days, a lot of folk were really worried about the millennium bug and all of that, whereas in the midst of that, I was asked to go to London. And the then Archbishop of Canterbury hosted an incredible event for young people called The Time of Our Lives. There were 5,000 or so young Anglicans were hosted across London, staying in churches for the most incredible of weekends. It began, as you do, with an immense party in the Royal Albert Hall, featuring Blue Peter presenters, comedian Tim Vine, the London Community Gospel Choir, to name just a few. I was there as a youth leader on a coach of 50-plus young folk and fellow youth workers from the Gloucester Diocese. And we all had these incredibly special passes that got us into all manner of venues all the way across the city. The Albert Hall I've just mentioned, Westminster Hall, Lambeth Palace, a bit of the Houses of Parliament. They were careful not to let us too far into that one. And then on the Sunday, Pentecost Sunday, we had the choice of 3 different cathedrals to worship at. Most of my youth group went to the ultra-trendy Soul Survivor at St. Paul's Cathedral. Other youth workers accompanied them. Or you could go to what was billed as Ambient Soul, led by the alternative worship group Grace at Southwark Cathedral. I hope you don't mind me telling you this one, but I didn't go, but Johnny Baker, who is still a really incredible youth worker, led that service. And he was so inspired that right at the end of the service, he improvised a liturgical sentence or two. And he was so overcome with emotion, he said, "May the light of Christ light up your lives." And everybody, 500 young people, responded instantly, "And up yours also." And so there you have spontaneous liturgy. But I wasn't there, so I can't be blamed-ish. So for me, though, I took a group to Westminster Abbey. And that was billed as ancient meets modern. And oh my, it was as if God at that very moment had created a profound act of worship just for me. I remember getting into the Abbey with a few thousand others, and it began with the RSCM, the Royal School of Church Music National Choir, singing a newly commissioned anthem. They sang from 4 different parts of the Abbey, the immense 5-manual organ blasting out. The sound was everywhere. Later in the service, you had young people carrying in not thuribles with incense, but actually highly polished silver buckets with incense gently wafting through the Abbey. And then, in about the middle of the service, there was a very small but high-quality little music group with a gentle guitar, piano, and some soaring harmonies. Bishop Lindsay Irwin preached the most incredible sermon that I have ever heard. More on that another day. And as part of the service, we were encouraged to go to different parts of the Abbey and light candles in front of these kind of digitally produced icons. It was all high-tech and yet rooted in our traditions. And when we were there standing in front of these icons, more music played and people, including myself, there was just spontaneous harmony all over the Abbey. So for me then, that ancient meets modern was really like being in heaven. So much so, hundreds of us didn't want to leave, and the Abbey Vergers virtually had to throw us out, back down to earth with a crash. And don't worry, I'm not going to ask you now, but I wonder if we were to sit down individually, what would your answer to that question be? What would your favourite act of worship be? We'll return to that another time. But today, Candlemas features a legal act, an act of worship, visiting the temple as law required, and where more ancient meets modern. So, ancient and modern, old and new, a marriage made in heaven. And I think that this is in large part what Candlemas is all about, as we have faithful Simeon taking the Christ child in his arms. And as both Simeon and Anna receive Jesus, one generation embraces another, revealing that we too are part of that embrace, as humanity embraces God, and God returns the embrace, the cuddle, if you like, to all of us. And can you just for a moment imagine what it must have been like for Simeon, waiting faithfully and patiently all those years, watching, waiting, longing, and then, as the Spirit leads, he sees Mary and Joseph and the vulnerable child through whom everything was created. And what must it have been like for Simeon, an old man, to hold the Christ child, the long-awaited Messiah, there in your very arms? We all know, most of us, I think, that holding a baby is so precious, but this one, God with us, humanity embracing God. Mind-blowing in the extreme. And at first glance, I don't think there can be any doubt that the encounter between Simeon, Mary, and Joseph and the Christ child, it was wholly one of awe, wonder, and astonishment. But the detail I love is that old Simeon is the faithful layman who has waited all his life to see the anointed Messiah. He's a man of faith, patience, and hope, who closes for us our Christmas story as he sees God's promises fulfilled right before his eyes. But that's of total contrast to the beginning of the Christmas story, where the father of John the Baptist, Zechariah the priest, doesn't believe what he's being told, and then he's struck dumb. So there's God's sense of humour right at work. The layman gets it, but the priest doesn't. I take note of that. But a little girl once asked the question, how old is God? And a very wise person answered her, younger than you and older than all of creation. And I rather like that answer. But in the temple that day, different epochs collide, the past, the present, and the future. Eternity has well and truly broken in as God's kingdom becomes more and more and more present, more and more realized, more and more real. And here's the thing. That kingdom cannot be stopped. Jesus has been born among us, recognized, lived, died, and lived again, set free from time and space. And indeed, he is embraced by a frail humanity, but a humanity imbued with hope, and hope is powerful. Ancient meets modern. The newest generation meets the old, as salvation is made known intergenerationally. So young at heart, and old then need one another to realize the fullest possible picture. God bids us come to worship and recognize his Son, embrace him, and know peace and the assurance of a place in his eternity. And I think the closest we come to this embrace is in the sacrament of the altar behind me, as we come patiently to seek, extending our guilty hands and receiving the very bread of life. Jesus, sacramentally present in our very hands. For we have seen the salvation of God revealed to all people, to Jew and Gentile alike. And so seeing, may that deep shalom peace be ours this Candlemas day and always, as ancient meets modern. Amen.